I'm going to be talking to Josipa Petrunic, who is the CEO of CUTRIC, and her organization has been chosen by the federal government to provide electric transportation or electric transit planning to transit agencies across Canada. But look, this may not be as as the Tesla sexy kind of story, but this is the nitty gritty work that is behind the rapid electrification of transportation all over the world, and it's really an interesting story. So, welcome to the interview, Josipa.
Thank you, Markham. And who says mathematics and physics isn't sexy? Well, I think it is.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Well, look, tell us what the announcement is about.
Sure. Well, per my comment, basically what it is for the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time helping transit agencies map out in detail how electric buses and fuel cell buses will operate in their communities. Like, when will they run out of power? How many hills do they need to navigate? How much charging? What will it cost? All those kind of mathematical and physical questions and economic questions. And we work to convince the federal government that this should be funded, because for the last few years, agencies have been scraping the bottom of the barrel to find some tens of thousands of dollars here and there and everywhere to do this planning work. Without this planning work, we're at risk of spending a lot of money for electric buses that we may or may not need, and they may or may not work. So we did convince the government. They agreed that planning before procurement is a smart thing. And so this fund is to help CUTRIC do a whole bunch of planning studies with transit agencies, big and small, across Canada, so that before they buy buses and chargers and energy storage devices, they know exactly what they need and what it's going to cost them.
Well, taking a rational approach to planning before investing billions of dollars as a taxpayer makes perfect sense to me. So tell me, how many agencies are we talking about, and where in Canada is this likely to take place, at least in the short term?
Sure. Well, in the last couple of years, we've done over 40 studies with 40 different transit agencies. So some of those agencies are coming back because it was the first study. Maybe we looked at a couple routes and now they want the whole fleet. But essentially, the fund will apply to any agency anywhere in Canada. And we already know some are lining up ready to go, from TransLink on the West Coast, which did some studies a couple of years ago, but needs a new refresh, over to TTC, to the Burlingtons, to London, up in Quebec, STO and a few agencies have identified need. And then out in the Maritimes, we have a couple agencies out in Kodiak Transpo, as an example, has identified its need. So everything from very small to very large agencies have already lined up to say, we need help with this planning.
And what kind of electrification are we talking about? I mean, I've interviewed you many times over the last few years, and we've talked about things like autonomous shuttles. We've talked about electric buses. We've talked about all sorts of things. What is the electrification of transit look like, say, for the average city?
Yeah, so in this particular program that we'll be doing, what's covered is battery electric buses that could be 40 footers or 60 footers. So a typical, like, normal bus that you would see, transit bus, is a 40 footer. 60 footers, the ones that are articulated, the extra long ones in larger cities usually. Those, and the charging infrastructure that goes along with them, that we can do the modeling for. It also includes hydrogen fuel cell buses and the hydrogen fueling. And the hydrogen modeling that we do includes fuel that some people would, depending on the labels you use, it could be green, blue, or gray hydrogen. Or if you want to use other language, it could be electrolytic and clean hydrogen, zero emissions, and hydrogen that comes from steam methane reformation. So any kind of hydrogen we'll be able to model in hydrogen buses. And it does include also electric autonomous shuttles. So if the transit agency is interested, like York Region in the city of Markham right now, in deploying small electric low-speed autonomous shuttles, and they need to do not just the energy modeling, but how many left turns can these shuttles do using some roadside infrastructure and communications, we can do that modeling too. What it doesn't include in this federal program is renewable natural gas. Now at CUTRIC, we do that modeling. We do renewable natural gas, but it is not included in this program. So agencies that also want us to model that, they'd have to top it up and cover that cost out of pocket.
I think, Josipa, it's fair to say that most Canadians wouldn't understand just the extent to which this is not just swapping out electric buses for diesel buses. This is literally a revolution in how we do public transit, how we do transportation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I know the word revolution is thrown out there. So maybe evolution, but fundamental overhaul is definitely true. And I'll just give a couple examples. When we do this modeling work, we don't just look at, okay, take a diesel bus off the road and put an electric bus on that exact same route. And when will it run out of power? That's part of the equation. But the bigger equation is, okay, you have 100 buses, and they all need to leave the depot with a full charge on their battery in the morning. Can your depot, first of all, deliver that amount of power in the few hours of overnight storage? Because these buses are not sitting idle for 20 hours a day like your car. They're actually coming back sometimes at 2 in the morning and leaving at 6 in the morning. So they don't have a huge charging window all the time. And so the modeling looks at, can your depot even receive that power? And if it can receive that power from the grid, can it deliver that power in the time frame you have? And if it can or cannot, when will the buses run out? When will they need top-up charging on during the day? Where should you put en route chargers? Okay, if you're going to need to put en route chargers here, here, and here because of the physics, do you even own the real estate? And often the answer is no. So you can't do it there, even though physics say you should, economics and politics say you're going to have to put it over here. And so the modeling includes all of that, which looks at the whole depot, the energy system, how the drivers will have to swap out shifts. If the buses are not coming back to the garage with their stated charge, they might have to swap out in the middle of the road. So these are all the factors that are taken into account, as well as, of course, how much greenhouse gas emissions are you going to save? So you can make that argument about the reason that this should be invested in.
And I was thinking also of some of the new technologies that are coming along, and autonomous shuttles are a really good example of that. How do autonomous shuttles fit into an electric transportation, electric transit system?
Yeah, I wish we could do a whole interview just on this. Across Canada, there's been a couple dozen autonomous shuttle projects, and they've all failed to lead to any kind of sustainable procurement of autonomous shuttles. The shuttle may have succeeded in the sense that it was on the road and it operated for a couple of weeks, but it's done, it's taken off the roads, and there's no purchases. And the reason is because at the end of most of these pilots, if they're not canceled early because of complications in the project, they're just not renewed because it's too hard right now for transit agencies to think about installing all the communication software that's needed. But the big opportunity with autonomous shuttles that we're pushing forward with is not every route needs a 40-foot bus. 40-foot buses are expensive. They're $1 million if they're electric. And you need a full driver for that. Add the labor cost, the operations, maintenance, and you have to park it somewhere. It's very expensive. So if you could get away with a smaller shuttle, why not? And if you can do that by adding shuttles to routes that are not typical bus routes, like a typical bus route should have several dozens of kilometers associated with it. So you get riders actually getting on the bus. But often our biggest problem in Canada is 2-3 kilometers from the subway or LRT station. That doesn't merit a bus because it's too expensive, but people aren't going to walk it, definitely not in the winter. So people drive and then they don't take the LRT. So those are great applications in Canada where you want these small shuttles. They may not need a driver. They may have a concierge on board. And it allows you to pick up 6 to 12 people. It's a quarter of the cost of a bus, and it can go on and off the route as needed in autonomous and driver mode so that we don't have to necessarily redo all our streets tomorrow in order to be able to deploy them.
Yeah, I think this is a really one of the big benefits of the technology you're talking about. I mean, sure, some of it is not available today, but the technology is changing so rapidly that we're only talking about a matter of years until it is ready to go. It is economic, it is implemented.
For sure.
And it changes the way we think about transportation. It changes the way we think about transit. We don't have to use the old 20th century model that we used to use for transit. We now have a 21st century model.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I'll give you an example of where I want us to get to, which is totally feasible right now. Like, we don't have to wait for all the technology to be here for fully autonomous connected vehicles to be deployed, because we can start with them in low speed environments on semi-dedicated laneway. We don't have to wait for the AV to be able to do everything safely. Why don't we redesign a little bit of our streets like we do with bicycle lanes to make it a little bit easier for the AV to do what it's there to do, which is move people in a way that might be cheaper than buses, but is better for the environment than cars. And as an example of price point, right now I want a person to think about maybe they need to get from point A to point B. Okay, you want to go out and meet some gals for the night. Taking the bus, it's a fixed route and costs you $2.50 or $3.50. You don't want to take the bus; it's going to be too long. You're in high heels. You don't want to walk the sidewalk, whatever. It's too circuitous. So you're thinking, I'm going to call an Uber, but the Uber is going to take you $16, $20, let's say, $15 to $20 to get there, and it's you and you're polluting in a car. I want you to think about the midway option, what if you had a shuttle that you call on demand and it's not $350, maybe it's $550 or $650 or $750, but it's not $16 or $20. So it's cheaper than the Uber, a little bit more expensive than the bus, but it's not a fixed route. So it's going to get you there faster and easier than the bus. And by contrast, you're going to save 10 to 15 bucks. There's a ton of us as Canadians that would do that. You know, when the bus doesn't serve my needs, but I don't want to spend the money on an Uber or a taxi. I want something in between. This is exactly there, and it's better for the environment. It's electric and it's shared mobility. I don't mind sharing my ride with 2 or 3 other people on that route, and it's zero emissions, and it, you know, it's all of those positives. And maybe it connects me to my LRT or my subway to get there the last stop. So that creating that midway option is going to really help people just not buy cars or leave the car at home, especially in urban environments.
Well, Josipa, I think this is really momentous for not just Canada, but of course we're seeing this trend around the world, and we're really at the beginning of it. And I think it's really critical that this kind of transformation of this part of the transportation model requires planning. So we'll circle back to the reason we were talking in the first place. And I think it's a really good thing. So thank you very much for your insights. Always appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Markham.